Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us. Thank you so much for joining us for today's event at this roundtable event co-hosted by the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, entitled Food Loss and Waste Successes from the US and Canada. I am honored to join you today to moderate this event. I'm Kimberly Sullivan, Communications Coordinator for the FAO, for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, where we also work on this important issue. As an overview, we know that food loss accounts for 14% of all of the food that we produce. This practically means that from post-harvest all the way through transport and to the wholesale markets, 14% of our food is lost. And another 17% becomes food waste. These are agriculture and food products wasted along the value chain from retail markets and on to restaurants, work canteens, school cafeterias, and even in our own households. With our latest hunger figure showing that as many as 828 million people around the world are hungry, it has never been more urgent to tackle food loss and waste. However, the good news is that today we are going to be speaking about solutions. We are fortunate to have with us municipalities from Canada and the US to share their food loss and waste reduction success stories today. These include the Canadian cities of Guelph and Vancouver and the US cities of Baltimore and Denver. I thank all of the panelists who are here to discuss this with us today, and of course, all of the audience. And I hope that you'll be active participants. Please note that the question and answer box is at the bottom, and we would ask that you put your questions in there. We'll be getting to a Q&A session later in the session. But before we explore these city examples, I wish to introduce Dr. Buzby, who will be delivering our opening remarks. Dr. Jean Buzby is the USDA Food Loss and Waste Liaison in the Office of the Chief Economist. Prior to this position, she worked for USDA's Economic Research Service for more than 20 years, most recently as the Chief of the Diet, Safety, and Health Economics branch in the Food Economics Division. Before moving into management, her primary areas of work as an agriculture economist at ERS were food safety and food consumption research. She is domestically and internationally known for her research on the amount and value of food loss at the retail and consumer levels in the United States. Thank you, Dr. Buzby, for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. I really appreciate the kind introduction. And welcome, colleagues and friends. I'm so glad to have you here to learn about some of the success stories in Canada and the United States. And thank you to our partners in hosting this event, the Food and Agriculture Organization's North America office. What I'm going to do is give a little bit more broad overview about food loss and waste and why it's important. And I will also give some context about the United States. And the next speaker will provide some context for Canada, since that's the other part of this webinar. Next slide, please. As Kimberly mentioned, food loss and waste is really a huge issue. Globally, it adds up to over 1/3 of all food produced, or roughly 1.3 billion tons each year, at a value of over $936 billion each year. It's also associated with around 8 to 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions associated with human activity, and about 1/4 of fresh water used by agriculture for crop production each year. Next slide. In the United States, we're the 3rd most populous country in the world, behind India and China, with over 332 million people. As you can see from this map, most of our major city centers are around the coast. We have over 108,000 cities and towns across the country. And again, we have, just like the global context, we have 1/3 of all food produced in the United States, or available for consumption in the United States, is also going to waste. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that's about 103 million tons of wasted food in the industrial, residential, commercial, and institutional sectors alone. The reality is we don't have good data on the farm level and up to the industrial sectors. We have 965,000 farm people in farming across the country, with Texas being the state with the most farms. Next slide. Reducing food loss and waste can generate several benefits to society. Most importantly, if the food is still wholesome, it can be donated to help feed families in need. It's also important to understand that reducing food waste can save or make money. The average household family of 4 in the United States spends about $1,500 on food that goes uneaten, and it can be a real business opportunity as well. And it's also important to understand that the resources used to make food that goes to waste could be conserved for more productive uses. These resources include arable land, fresh water, labor, energy, and other inputs. And we talked a bit about the greenhouse gases generated. Some of that is from food rotting in landfills, and by reducing these greenhouse gases, that can also help mitigate climate change and help meet some of our climate change goals. Next. In the United Nations, in September 2015, put out sustainable development goals to ensure that there were 17 of these sustainable development goals, and in particular, SDG 12 is to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. And target 12.3 of this sustainable development goal calls for essentially cutting in half global food waste at the retail and consumer levels by 2030, which is just 7 years away, as well as reducing food losses earlier in the production and supply chains. And by the way, the United States also has a national goal to cut food loss and waste in half by 50% by 2030. Next. The Environmental Protection Agency created the food recovery hierarchy to show the most effective ways to address food waste, with the top tiers being the most preferred. The best solution, of course, is if the food is still wholesome, is to get it to those who are in need, and just in general, preventing food loss and waste from ever occurring. Preventing food loss and waste from ever occurring is the very best solution. But if you do still have wholesome food left available, the best thing is to get it to feed those needs, such as donating extra food to food banks, soup kitchens, and shelters. And then you could also feed animals if the food scraps are still wholesome. And then there are many industrial uses, such as rendering things down for oils and soaps and creating energy. And then there is also composting to make a valuable soil amendment, both for homes, school gardens, and agriculture production. The worst case solution is to landfill it or incinerate it without energy generation, because then all those embedded into inputs go totally to waste as well. Next slide. In the United States, we do have a federal interagency collaboration to reduce food loss and waste, and that is comprised of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where I hail from, as well as the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Each of these agencies has their own activities to reduce food loss and waste, as well as we have collective activities. On the next slide, you'll see the U.S. Food Loss and Waste 2030 Champions Program, which is a joint initiative between USDA and EPA. And that's where companies can voluntarily commit and publicly commit to reducing food loss and waste in half by 2030. And we've got many industry giants involved, and we are actively growing the program. We've grown it from 35 last year to 49 champions so far this year. Next slide. USDA has many different efforts to reduce food loss and waste. In general, we have research underway, both with our own bench scientists and in our own laboratories, as well as extramural research that we fund to develop new innovations and technologies. For example, our Agricultural Research Service develops new cultivars that have longer shelf life, such as a keepsake strawberry, and new equipment such as the apple sorting machine, which has less bruising damage and sorts more efficiently. We also have the Economic Research Service that estimates food loss and waste at the retail and consumer levels, as well as doing studies on the drivers of food loss. We also produce education and tools. We have the Food Keeper app, for example, which provides storage and different kinds of tips for over 700 commodities, how long you can store it. It can also give you information on how to thaw your Thanksgiving turkey of various sizes. We also have funding, and it's really exciting that USDA in June announced that it will invest up to $90 million to reduce food loss and waste, which is something really historical. I've never seen this in my over 20 years of working in this space. $30 million of that is to plus up our existing compost and food waste reduction cooperative agreements. That 30 million is over 3 years, and we're just about to announce our latest awardees. Next slide. Some of the key takeaways to think about as we go through this webinar together is that in the US and globally, we have a long way to go to reduce food loss in half by 2030. And as you'll see and hear, it's really complex. Reducing food loss and waste is going to take many different solutions from farm to table. And everyone really has a role to play in reducing food loss and waste as we are all consumers. It's a really important challenge, and we all have a role to play and can pitch in. And also USDA is helping prevent, reduce, and repurpose food loss and waste. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. And Kimberly, back to you now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jean Buzby, for that fantastic overview, touching upon a lot of really important topics here. And I think most of all, the very ambitious target of cutting by 50% by 2030, which of course sounded far away some years ago when we were speaking about the SDGs, but is only, as you noted, 7 years away. So I think that this is an important topic of what we're discussing today, to see what is happening in our cities and exciting success stories that we're going to be discussing today. So that's a perfect segue into our next section with the panelists. So I would like to now ask my colleagues to bring to the screen the photos of the panelists as I'm going to introduce them, and then we'll be walking through them for their presentation. So our first guest today is Ms. Denise Philippe. She is a senior policy advisor with Metro Vancouver and the National Zero Waste Council, NZWC, in Canada, which is an initiative of Metro Vancouver that works collaboratively with business, government, and communities to prevent waste. Since 2012, Denise has been the council's portfolio lead on food loss and waste prevention and reduction, and was instrumental in developing a food loss and waste strategy for Canada. She has led collaborative research projects, peer learning networks, and knowledge sharing initiatives. Denise is a certified professional planner with an MED in environmental education. Our next panelist is David Messer. He is Executive Director of the Smart Cities Office within the city of Guelph, where he leads 2 initiatives focused on growing the circular economy, Our Food Future and the Circular Opportunity Innovation Launchpad. Prior to joining the city of Guelph, David worked in the technology sector as Vice President of Public Affairs with Edelman and Vice President of Policy with his Information Technology Association of Canada, now TechNation. David began his career in the provincial governments of Ontario and Alberta, supporting economic development, regulatory modernization, digital government, and international relations. Our third guest, Ava Richardson, is Director of Sustainability at the Baltimore City Office of Sustainability. She has over a decade of experience leading public health initiatives, advocating for environmental policies, and managing programs designed to address social, racial inequities, and environmental justice. She previously served as a sustainability manager and a food matters technical advisor in the office, where she led the implementation of special projects, supported the Commission of Sustainability, and helped to pilot new sustainability programming, such as the farmers market-based food scrap collection pilot. She holds a BS in biology from Frostburg State University, an MPH from Morgan State University, and is currently obtaining a doctorate of public health with a focus on environmental health and engineering from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Also from Baltimore, Kara Murray is an administrative analyst with the Baltimore City Department of Public Works and will be jointly presenting with Ava. Kara works on developing policy initiatives within the Office of Waste Diversion, as well as pursuing grant funds, engaging with the community, and overall supporting the efforts to make solid waste more sustainable in Baltimore. Her background is in public policy, and she received her master's in public affairs, focusing on environmental policy and natural resource management from Indiana University in 2016. Kara worked with the Parks and Recreation Department in Bloomington, Indiana, as a natural resources fellow, and is happy to return to public service after working as a federal consultant for 3 years. And finally, Laine Sidlowski is the Food Systems Administrator for the City of Denver in the Department of Public Health and Environment. She oversees the Denver Sustainable Food Policy Council and leads the food systems team to implement the Denver Food Vision 2030 to make the city's food systems more healthy, vibrant, inclusive, and resilient. Laine was previously the first food policy director for the District of Columbia and the leader of the first DC Food Policy Council. Laine holds a master's degree in city and regional planning and a certificate in urban design from the University of Pennsylvania and a BA from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in environmental studies. She is a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners and serves on the leadership committee of the American Planning Association's Food Systems Division. Thank you to all of our panelists. As you see, we have a wealth of expertise here, so this is going to be a very exciting session. And once again, I see that people have started putting in questions. As you're listening to the panelists, please jot your questions down. We will get to them at the end. So without further ado, I will pass on to Ms. Denise Philippe, Senior Policy Advisor at the National Zero Waste Council, Vancouver. Denise, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kimberly. And good morning, everyone. Before we begin, I just would like to acknowledge, really with much gratitude and respect, the 10 local First Nations located within the Metro Vancouver region. I would like to acknowledge and give thanks to all the Indigenous nations as the original stewards of the lands and waters around us, allowing us this opportunity to really gather with you today. So for those of you who don't know very much about the National Zero Waste Council, I just want to clarify a couple things. So we are a national initiative of Metro Vancouver, which is a regional level of government constituted by about 21 municipalities, 1 electoral area, and 1 First Nation. So we are a regional level of government really hosting this national initiative. We are waste prevention focused, using a circular economy lens to do the work that we do. I'm just advancing slides. And we work on a range of waste streams, from plastics to construction and demolition, but also food loss and waste. And that really is a core part of the work that we focus on, of the waste streams that we focus on. So I would like to spend just a few minutes providing a little bit of context, the Canadian context in which we work. I think it's important. It really drives what we do and how we do it. And it may be different for many of you that have joined this morning, as your context, your policy context, your geographical context is different. So it's an important piece to acknowledge. For us in Canada, food loss and waste is about $100 billion annual cost. It's huge, and it contributes or generates about 4% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So it is a significant issue. About half of the food that we produce and distribute never gets eaten. So our numbers are actually higher than the global average. Our geography is vast. We have a huge country. We have very few urban centers, and the ones that we have are relatively small. And as you know, they're all located along the bottom of our country. Those urban centers are interspersed, again, with large rural areas that have small communities and isolated farmsteads. So the distances over which we're distributing food or transporting food are quite large. And that has significant implication really for things like logistics and cold chain. So we're seeing a lot of food loss happening at those points of distribution or in between when we're transporting food. We have food insecurity in both our urban and rural areas, and we have a very young food security support network. Our Canadian economy is really dominated by small to medium-sized enterprises. That sometimes is a good thing. Small companies are sometimes easier to work with. They're a little bit nimble. And we do find that in the Canadian context that many of those SMEs have a sustainability ethos. So that's good news for us. We, of course, have large businesses here. They're fewer, though, and they hold a larger share of the market. In some ways, that makes it easier for us to collaborate because there are fewer interests to negotiate. But it does mean that there are greater concerns over data sharing and really retaining competitive advantage. So I think that this really differs Canada from the US, for example. Just a couple words about our policy context. So local municipalities or regional governments, such as Metro Vancouver, are really responsible for waste. We're responsible for waste policy. Our federal government has a significant policy role to play and a funding role to play when it comes to food loss and waste, primarily through agriculture, a little bit through environment and climate change. Our provincial role can be strong. Certainly, provinces act as points of harmonization for scaled-up policies and actions that are implemented by cities. We do find leadership happening on the part of British Columbia, Quebec, Nova Scotia, who was actually one of the first provinces to implement a province-wide organics ban in the country. But the other provinces are lagging. We're not really seeing them at the table in the same way. Our next speaker is with Guelph, and he might have fresh insight maybe on the role of the Ontario government. We'll hear a little bit more, maybe, David, from you on that. All right, so as a regional level of government, I have to say one of our successes is acknowledging that we are never going to tackle food loss and waste alone. So we worked with about 900 stakeholders across the country throughout supply chains to craft a national strategy on food loss and waste. This meta framework really set out key actions for governments at different levels, city, province, federal, key actions for business and community organizations as well. As you can see, there were some priority action areas, and that's what you see on the slide. And we, as a council, working nationally, even though housed at a regional level of government, are delivering on those recommendations in different ways through federal collaboration, which I'll speak about a little bit more about in a moment, through knowledge sharing and stakeholder connecting, through research, and through campaigns. Before I go too much further into giving examples of success, I will like to say that we see two key principles that make an initiative successful or not. One is collaboration, and to some degree, the level of collaboration that's happening. We know that siloed action can't succeed. So this is kind of a lesson for all of us who are working really at the city level, is that we need to find others to work with and others in other sectors, community, public sector, private sector, et cetera. And that we need to leverage. So food loss and waste is a big lift. And we need to find where we can have one policy leverage action and where we can see that action leverage policy change. I just would like to give a nod to our federal government. So we do work in collaboration with them in a couple of ways. One in particular is on the food policy for Canada. Now, this is a meta federal policy. And originally it was really focused on things like nutrition and food security. We ended up with a policy that had a food loss and waste stream in it, which was great news for us. The federal government did put together a policy, an advisory panel of practice leaders and thought leaders across the country. The National Zero Waste Council was part of that advisory panel, and it allows us to make direct policy recommendations to our Minister of Agriculture. We have a recommendation in front of her at the moment where we're asking our federal government to support measuring and monitoring efforts tied to reduction targets. We're asking the federal government to provide fiscal incentives to have that work done, and to provide one central point where data is collected and where a harmonized methodology for measuring and monitoring can happen. So we're using the same words where we know that we're measuring the same kinds of things. We're also asking the federal government to really take a look at those best before dates, and people can ask me more about that afterwards. Another area where we're collaborating, oh, I just need to go back. With the federal government is on their food waste innovation challenge. I would say that Canada is not necessarily known for its innovation. And I think this was kind of recognized also at a federal level when it comes to food loss and waste. And so they launched a 3-year challenge meant to provide ever greater financial awards to companies that were scaling up and moving into market to do really great things around food loss and waste. I feel like one of the successes of our national strategy is that we highlighted the importance of innovation, particularly around processing, for example. And this is a nice way for us to work with the federal government. We chair and are a member of the jury of that federal challenge, where we can make sure that insights around the intersection of food waste and climate, for example, are really brought to the table when we're taking a look at businesses that are likely to succeed, and are they going to succeed across issue areas. These are a couple of examples of companies that are making it through those ever smaller hoops of financial awards.
2 minutes remaining.
Oh, I knew I was going to run out of time. Okay, I'm going to go quite quickly here. So we are seeing kind of 4 or 5 areas where cities can really play a significant role. And they are listed on the slide here. I'm not going to go into them other than to say that when it comes to behavior change campaigns, Metro Vancouver and Toronto are shining lights. Edmonton's Waste Recovery Network is a great example of convening stakeholders. Organics bans are critical, and we need to make sure that organics bans and behavior change are linked. This is just an example of the National Zero Waste Council's consumer-facing food waste prevention behavior change campaign. It is licensed from RAP. And I'll keep going here. It's been in market since 2018. We are in market, in store, and interfacing with consumers. One of the local governments really are the key stakeholders who are lifting and delivering this campaign, because they have a direct connection to folks on the ground. And I can talk a little bit more about that if people have questions around it. I'd say one of the ways that Toronto, Metro Vancouver have been successful is that they've added skill development workshops and opportunities like that for citizens. So it's not just raising awareness or providing recipe tips or storage tips at home. It's actually doing some skill development on the ground as well. This just gives you a sense of our reach over the years. This is an example of a coordinated food recovery organization, or a food recovery organization where Metro Vancouver and our neighboring regions, so we're bringing together 30 cities and towns, having more food recovery organizations in an area can make it complicated and difficult for businesses to figure out where they're giving their food to. So sometimes cities can play a role working with each other and selecting 1 or 2 or 3 food recovery organizations and helping them really scale up and create a market for the food that they recover, as well as ensuring that that food is distributed through charitable channels. Just a couple more minutes, if you don't mind. I just want to say that we are seeing a shift now from just food loss and waste to a broader systems approach, where we are looking at circular food solutions that are bringing in things like justice, health, Indigenous relationships and reconciliation, for example. This shift is critical, we believe, to advancing food loss and waste and making sure we are successful. We're doing this work in collaboration, certainly with Our Food Future, and you'll see that their logo's on the bottom left of a research report we did. I encourage you to take a look at their website, the National Zero Waste Council's website, and Circular Economy Leadership Canada's website for all those resources. We're working with Guelph to establish place-based food hubs, which we feel are going to be more successful because they allow for greater collaboration across supply chains and deeply in place. These are just some examples of initiatives that are happening across the country that are more circular in nature, that are not just food loss and waste focused. And again, I can speak to them later. And these are my final recommendations for all of you who are working at the city level. I would say the most important here is go circular where you can. So really think about the lessons that food hubs hold for us, collaborate widely, and make sure that your policies and practice are really joined up and that they're joined up across space, across geographies. I'll leave it there. I think I'm over time. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Denise. That was really an excellent overview. You covered a lot of material, and I know what was a short time. Key takeaway there, I mean, incredible. Similarly to what Jean was saying, we see lots of similarities between the two countries, but 100 billion, the cost of food loss and waste, the annual cost. I think this is something that really makes an impression on us. And please, all of your questions, please put that in the Q&A, because Denise has raised a lot of really interesting topics. And I do note her point on bringing to the Q&A session the point of best buy dates, which is something we struggle with a lot in communication for people to have a better understanding of this. So this was a wonderful overview, Denise. Thank you so much. And now I'm happy to continue with Canada and to ask David Messner, Executive Director at Smart Cities Office, City of Guelph, who is now going to be able to give us an example of what is happening in one Canadian municipality. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kimberly, and thanks everyone for joining today. It's really a big pleasure to be here. So just to set the context, there we go. For those of you who aren't familiar with Guelph, we are a medium-sized municipality about an hour outside of Toronto. We sit in the middle of a larger agricultural area in Wellington County. And if you've ever heard of Guelph, you would have probably heard of it because of food. We are home to one of the sort of leading agricultural and food universities in North America, the oldest veterinary college in North America. And because of that, we have a large agri-tech cluster in our region. We are home to large contingents of provincial and federal agricultural ministries. And so food is really kind of a bit of our thing here. So a few years ago, Canada's federal government ran a Smart Cities Challenge and calling cities across the country to come with their vision of what a smart city would look like. And so quite naturally for us, we came back with a vision around food. And this idea here of building a regional circular food economy. We set some goals as we launched this program, focused on increasing access to affordable, nutritious food, supporting new businesses, and unlocking the economic value of waste. So treating waste as a resource. Now, when we started with this is a whole of community vision. It was built over a couple of years using everybody at the table, from 37 food relief organizations to probably 12 departments at the university, municipal governments at the city and county level, public health, local hospitals, doctors, a huge range of stakeholders that we calculated about a year ago at well over 1,000 people. And since it started really in 2020, it's really spiraled and grown in a very rapid way. This is kind of what our program scope looked like about a year ago. I think it's much bigger now. I think we're quite around 70 programs, touching on everything from designing AI systems that are gathering data in real time on the back of municipal waste collection vehicles, down to helping food banks switch to a hub and spoke model and to be much more efficient, and many other facets. But to sort of keep with time today, I want to drill down in just a few instances that we're looking at in terms of food loss and waste, and how we've approached it with our resources and this community approach. So if we think about where food waste comes from, we started really taking a systems lens at the whole thing. So this is what you call a Sankey diagram. We worked with Metabolic, an organization out of the Netherlands, and Dillon Consulting to pull this together. And it has over 80 data sets looking at the entire food supply chain across our region, so we can identify where food is lost and wasted, and then figure out what are the ways that we can intervene to save that and generate the highest potential value from that. So as you can see here, when things drop into gray, that kind of means they are wasted. And a few things I'll just point out in here. Number one, you can see what is largely produced in our agricultural region in Wellington County. So fruits and vegetables, things of that nature. Much of that gets exported out of our region, which is a trick that we're working to try and address. But if we think about the waste elements, at number two, you can kind of see where households waste food. And it's about a third of food that is purchased by households gets wasted. But of that, about 60% ends up going to compost. The city of Guelph has had municipal composting for about 30 years. And Wellington County has had it now for about 5 or 6. So that's something we're looking to address. But if you look at the rest of the system, it's not necessarily the prime focus. If you look later in number 2 at sort of hotels, restaurants, and institutes, and also local businesses, you can see considerably more food waste, 25.4 kilotons, which ends up directly in landfill, which if we go back to Dr. Buzby's food pyramid, which I'm so glad she showed because that's the basis for so much of our work, that is really a much worse case scenario that we need to think about addressing. Also, all of that, food that makes it down to your plate is totally dwarfed by waste upstream in the food industry, if you look at number 3. So processing waste, storage, packaging, and production loss, that is some real system failures that we need to also think about how we're going to address as a full systems approach. So now moving on to a few interventions. There's many more I can talk about, but I'll just talk about 3 addressing some of these bigger issues we were talking about. So if we think about the waste that makes it down to the plate, 65% of the food that is edible, that is lost and wasted, comes from businesses, particular businesses in the IC&I sector, which stands for institutional, commercial, and industrial. So we're talking about daycare centers, seniors' homes, grocery stores, restaurants, hospitals, all of these types of organizations. So through our program, we worked with some amazing collaborators at the Circular Innovation Council to stand up a pilot, which is helping a lot of those businesses divert waste from landfill to compost. We've been as high as 60 businesses as part of this pilot right now, and diverted over 318 tons of organic waste. We're also using this as a platform to gather more data on IC&I waste. This is a huge gap right now where, because it's privately hauled and privately handled, there's very little data. So we're developing sensors to go in the bins in real time, where then we can actually develop dashboards and have the 6 daycares that are a part of this program actually not only benefit from the scale of the program, so they're not paying for their individual waste hauling, they're getting a much greater discount, but then they'll also see how they stack up versus all the other daycares in the region, and whether they're a laggard and they should reduce more, or we should help them with interventions. The other piece of this program that I think is quite interesting is on food rescue. We work with Second Harvest as part of this to really help organizations think about where food rescue can fit into their waste management strategy, because we don't want businesses diverting food waste if it's just going to end up at a food relief organization and they have to throw it out and pay that cost. We want it to be a mutually beneficial arrangement, and you want to make sure that the business knows how to do it, knows where it can go, and knows the types of things that they should be donating. So creating that system as a part of this is a really important part of even getting higher on that hierarchy to make sure we're actually rescuing food in a way that matters. I'll also note as part of this program, we've created some new social enterprises that are able to help meet those gaps in the food rescue space. So I'll point to Upcycle Kitchen, which produces food, frozen food meals with rescued food, and then sells it through the online grocery store, Groceries by the Seed, which is able to take in large amounts of food rescue. Another program is Community Food, which is effectively a food truck, which cooks rescued food, sells it at business parks during the day for profit, then takes it to and provides free meals in lower income communities in the dinner time hour. So these are just different institutions that we now have that are able to help support that rescuing element. The other piece I think we need to think about is, I started my career in Alberta where the energy sector is huge. And, beside an upgrader, they have a pipe going into the next factory that might be making a chemical or a gas or something else like that. They're really, valuing that resource. And where I think we need to go in the food system is starting to think more about food waste as a resource to be captured. And for this reason, we started up our second initiative called COIL, which is effectively a business accelerator. We supported a small number of businesses initially through Food Future, but with COIL, we've taken it to a whole other level. We've worked with over 100 businesses so far in the past year that we've provided funding through a range of programs. I'm not going to go through everything on this slide, but just to point out that we have research and data to understand what streams we can capture. We have innovation funding to help businesses and entrepreneurs turn those waste streams into valuable products. And then we have scaling supports working with innovation partners to help them actually become commercializable businesses. So you need kind of all three parts of this to create a circular economy system, and food waste is really an ideal place for this to happen. And we've had
2 minutes remaining.
Huge success in the past year. I mentioned we've worked with over 100 different companies across Ontario, with revenue projections hitting around $9 million. The ramen example was included in Denise's slide, and this comes from a pilot we did with Sunrise Soya, a large tofu manufacturer. For every pound of tofu, there's a pound of waste. We were able to take that waste, turn it into ramen noodles, turn it into muffins, and other products as well, and they're estimating about $8 million in new projected sales from those products. Another quick story, worked with an onion ring factory. The tops and the bottoms of the onions end up getting taken off and sent to compost. But now through this program, they're sending 2 truckloads a day to another factory where they're turning it into an onion concentrate, which the second factory had to previously import from overseas. And they're now estimating about $1.4 million in revenue from that. So there's a million stories I could tell about how these resources can be revalued if we create the systems to help make that happen. And my very last thing I'll point of, if anybody's thinking about upcycling and where that can fit into a broader strategy, number one is the need for clean, consistent material streams. Mixed waste is the enemy of the circular economy, and the more that we can find ways to separate, it doesn't matter if it's food or any other sector, that's what we need to drive innovation and business growth. The other piece is that not all circular actions are necessarily good for the planet. We worked with the Ivy Business School at University of Western Ontario on the report that I have on the right there about scaling the climate smart circular economy, where they look at practices in Montreal and in Toronto from a range of businesses, identifying where there are actually demonstrable greenhouse gas reductions from an upcycling activity going on between a range of businesses. The last piece I'll mention too is there's a real need for market development in the upcycling and circular economy space. Our colleagues at Anthesis Provision did some research, and only about 1 in 5 Canadians know what upcycling means. And of those, once you tell them what upcycling is and that a product contains something that was, going to waste previously, 82% of the respondents said that they were highly interested in learning more or purchasing those types of products. So it's all about really framing this as climate action and realizing that our waste are actually resources we should be bringing into our economy. So thank you so much for your time. There's my coordinates there at foodfuture.ca and coil.eco, and I look forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. So much interesting information there about what is happening in Guelph, and absolutely love the tofu story. And you said you had a million others like this. So I definitely encourage all of the people who are the attendees to put questions in there. I certainly hope that we will get to there in the question and answer session, and all of the wonderful experience with daycare centers, cafeterias and everything. I mean, I think that we can really learn a lot about your experiences. So this is fantastic. Now, it gives me great pleasure to hop across the border, that we're going to be traveling now from Canada to the United States to see examples from the US. First, from Baltimore, we welcome Ava Richardson, Director of Sustainability, and her colleague Cara Murray, Administrative Analyst at the Baltimore Office of Sustainability, to explain to us all of the activities happening there. Ava and Cara, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Kimberly, and thank you so much to USDA and FOA for having us here this morning. Again, my name is Ava Richardson, Sustainability Director for Baltimore City. And I'm excited to share our experience and kind of our deep dive in food waste here in Baltimore. So roughly 3 years ago, we started a deeper dive into food waste in partnership with the Natural Resources Defense Council. And over the course of 2 to 3 years, that partnership provided hundreds of thousands of dollars to support the work, including funding for a full-time staff position, support for for kind of small community level grants across the city, and then also funds to infuse different pilot projects related to food rescue, community composting, and other pilots that help us target some aspect of the food recovery hierarchy. So that work was really built on the heels of some efforts that had taken place across the city around 2014, where different collaborators were gathered to help put together the city's food waste recovery strategy. And that outlined 70 different strategies that related to how we wanted to approach food waste prevention, food rescue, and food scrap recycling or composting on different levels. And it set out some large goals over time, over the next 20 years or so, that Cara will tell us a little bit about later. But during this 2-year deep dive, we really did benefit a lot from getting a lot of expertise from our partners at NRDC, in addition to working more collaboratively or engaging in cross-agency collaboration with our Department of Public Works, the Health Department, our Baltimore Office of Promotion in the Arts, the Baltimore Development Corporation, the Maryland Food Bank, as well as other divisions across the city, including our food policy team. And so these efforts helped to spur several different pilot projects and new initiatives that we pursued. So at the prevention level and kind of like the awareness raising level, we supported several educational campaigns and created educational materials. This image here, bottom left corner, was a food waste reduction guide that really helped to get people thinking about how they can be preventing waste inside their home. So much of the waste, the food waste that's generated happens at that consumer level, and much of that is residential. So what is it that it looks like? How can we inform people of how to prevent waste from the time that they're shopping in the grocery store, before you even start preparing a meal, thinking about how you prepare less, or even looking at how you're storing produce or other food items. We had another series of posters that were created that helped to bring the issue of food waste to the broader context of the environmental and food systems implications. And so the way that we looked at and approached food waste was from the perspective of that kind of combined impact on environmental justice, waste management, and soil health, as well as all of the social implications of some of the challenges that we're trying to address when we're tackling food waste. We were able to launch a few different pilot projects that included food scrap collection at one of our farmers markets where we were feeding hogs. And so here's a picture of one of the hogs. They're enjoying a sweet potato. And we realized that a lot of this was not new. when it comes to taking kitchen scraps and feeding animals with it, that was something that had been done and was common practice throughout different parts of history, especially as resources were limited. This picture here reflects a 1917 era poster that was encouraging Americans to save their food scraps to feed hogs due to limited resources because of wartime pressures. And so 100 years later, we're still working on this issue. And we have a lot more capacity and resources and technology and understanding to pursue it. But we know that there's so much work still to be done to really effectively address food waste issues across our city and nationally and globally as well. These are some more examples of some of the pilots or some of the initiatives we supported. We worked with our health department to educate health inspectors about how they can be serving as points of information and encouraging different food businesses about what they can be doing in order to reduce food waste within their business. And so whether or not that was engaging in food rescue or signing up for composting or food scrap recycling services. And again, where we see the most return on investment when it comes to preventing that food waste, especially for small food-facing businesses that have limited resources, that can be such a money-saving approach and effort. So some of these particular images right here, kind of again, they were critical to educating and raising awareness about the issue. Why is compost important in the landscape of waste, which outlined the findings of a 2019 waste sort that was conducted by the Department of Public Works. And it really revealed, which is common among many cities, but 75% roughly of our waste stream is either recyclable or compostable. And we have the breakdown of the different materials. Based on that particular waste sort, which was primarily residential waste, 25% of all of the waste was food alone. And that doesn't include other organic or compostable materials such as wood waste and trees and other organics. I think a few things that we learned, and as we're going into a phase where we're learning how to better institutionalize this approach or that focus on food waste across the city. One of the things that I think has been really helpful to understand is having that dedicated staff focused on the issue of food waste really helps to move the needle and push things forward. And that requires resources, ensuring that there are adequate number of people that have a hyper focus on this and the knowledge base and expertise to understand how to work with different partners and gather the necessary resources to accomplish some of these goals. Also, I think it's, again, critically important that food waste is framed as a climate and environmental justice issues. And that's not just from the perspective of food insecurity. And that's another thing that I think is really important to highlight that I learned during this process. We talk oftentimes, or I hear food rescue talk in terms of addressing food insecurity. I think that narratives has become problematic, considering that we don't want to take food that's rescued and only feed its people that we deem to be living in poverty or deem to be food insecure. I think it's more important to say we need to feed people. The economic circumstances of communities that are dealing with food insecurity are much deeper, heavily entrenched issues that require addressing poverty and the root causes of those issues. And so when we talk about and frame food rescue around food insecurity alone, I think it becomes hard to move the needle on those issues. And it also continues the stigmatization of kind of food insecurity and some of those supports and helps. And sometimes that can lead to a lesser quality of food or a lower quality of food getting to populations that are dealing with economic challenges, which is what we don't want. And it's really important that we not communicate that to communities. And I think where there is a shift in terms of how food rescue is talked about and approached that I think will be critical for how the city pursues and continues to engage with this issue in the future. So,
2 minutes remaining.
right. And aside from that, again, Kara will talk about some of the things that we're doing and working on now. We have continued to have some of our colleagues across the city convene to explore and ideate and address different food waste reduction issues across the city to figure out how we can continue to move the needle. And we have some really exciting policy changes that have come down at the state level that are going to continue to propel this work. But with that, I'll go ahead and pass it to Kara to share more about what our Department of Public Works is doing now.
Thanks, Eva. I'll run through quickly some of this context. As Eva mentioned, we have food waste reduction goals in Baltimore City. The Baltimore Food Waste and Recovery Strategy was released in 2018, and the Less Waste Better Baltimore Plan, which was part of the overall city audit, came out in 2020. Sorry, I'm having video issues. But as you can see in the table, we have different goals for different parts of the city for food waste reduction. And as noted in our Less Waste Better Baltimore plan, food waste reduction, residential organics diversion, and commercial organics diversion has some of the highest diversion potential of our total waste stream. So just a quick overview of the timeline. Our program kicked off in 2020. It was implemented really at the beginning of the pandemic and finished up in June of this year. And we're in kind of a wind down period for the next couple months to help finalize spending that was planned during implementation, attend some more cohort meetings, and discuss our future activities regarding food waste in the program in our future with NRDC. So our elements included food recovery initiatives, food scrap recycling, and education and outreach. As Eva mentioned, we wanted to increase capacity for nonprofits that are in the food loss and recovery space. We launched a working group that includes higher education institutions and continues to expand to other food loss and waste specialists within the city. We also wanted to implement and have implemented programming with K through 12 schools that connect them to locally grown food. We have food scrap recycling at 2 farmers markets that feeds the hogs, as Eva mentioned. And then we started a pilot program at 5 convenience centers run by the Department of Public Works. So where folks can already take their household hazardous waste, recycling, and other waste drop-offs. We now collect food scrap recycling there. And then we did a lot of outreach through composting workshops, grow centers, social medias, and we had a lot of physical things we could hand out, such as magnets and pamphlets. So as a result of our food scrap collection at convenience centers, we've seen some mixed results across the collection totals from these convenience centers. They're located across the city and have had varying success at food scrap collection. But to date, we've collected over 75,000 pounds of food scraps that go to be composted in Prince George's County, a couple counties south of Baltimore City. So very recently, this program has moved out of pilot phase and is now a permanent offering of DPW. And we've seen some of these images produced at the beginning of the Food Matters program. To date, we've held 16 compost workshops where we've distributed free compost bins to participants. We've had 17 grow centers that provide free trees and or mulch and even seeds and resources to residents. And our social media posts about food waste reduction have reached over 8,000 people. we've had success through our working groups, institutionalizing the program within the Department of Public Works. That's expanded some resources around waste management in our Grow Center organization. And again, attending regional cohort meetings through the program hosted by NRDC has been really important as part of learning from other cities' examples.
This is Kimberly. I'm sorry, we're running a little over
No
time.
worries.
So
I'll stop it there.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful. Both Ava and Kara, thank you so much for that great overview. And I think we're going to be getting to lots of questions because I can see they're already coming in for both of you in the question and answer. So thank you so much for that overview of all the exciting things happening in Baltimore. And now we're going to travel all the way across the United States to the Rocky Mountains. I'm very excited to be able to welcome Laine Sidlowski, who is Food Systems Administrator at the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment, to show us what is happening in the Mile High City. So thank you, Laine, for joining us.
Hello, everyone. As Kimberly said, I'm Laine Sidlowski. We're really happy to share a little bit about what is happening in Denver around our food waste prevention, rescue, and recycling efforts. I know we are a little short on time, so I'm going to try and jump in. We do have a Denver food vision that was released in 2017 that really set out a vision for what the future of Denver's food system should look like, under the premise that our city's food system should be inclusive, healthy, vibrant, and resilient. We had hundreds of community members, many focus groups across the city to really rise up priorities from our community base about what were their interests and priorities, and food waste rose to the top. Through that process, we set a goal to have a 57% reduction in tons of food waste collected. We do have composting already within the city, and there were some ideas that came up around supporting consumer education, supporting food waste reduction at businesses, really integrating our food waste reduction efforts into the farms, helping around hunger relief, but as Ava said, not conflating the idea that our efforts around hunger relief should all result from food waste reduction. They're not one and the same, they are complementary. And we really felt like that was an important part of our approach to equity and how we handle food waste and healthy food access within the city. So I'm going to give a little bit of context about Denver. We have 700,000 some residents within the city. Around 30,000 of them are participating in our composting program. That has about tripled in use. It is a voluntary opt-in program where residents pay to have residential composting pickup. And it's gone up by about a third over the past 3 years. So demand is rising. We see that a lot of tons of waste have been collected, around 220,000 from our residential homes per year, but apartment buildings and commercial collection does not occur within the city of Denver because of a statewide law within Colorado that does not permit us to do that. We're hoping to change that. So there's some ballot measures on this midterm election ballot, and people are working on that at the state level. We set goals. With our sustainability goals, they're very complementary to the Denver Food Vision goals to increase our recycling and composting. Our recycling rate is not great as a city. We only have around 15 to 20% recycling. And we have some perverse disincentives within our city. Our landfill funds are environmental protection dollars within the city. So while we're very grateful for every dollar that we get, there's certainly an incentive for more and more use to go to our landfill. These are some pictures here from some of our landfills and composting facilities just outside the city. You can see the types of foods that are entering into our waste stream. Again, much like Baltimore, a lot of our research was really propelled forward and framing of our program within the city of Denver by the Natural Resources Defense Council's funding and grant that we received, and the research that they did to help us really quantify where is food primarily being wasted within our city. We really found that a lot of food was being wasted at the residential level. It was our second highest food waste category following commercial and grocery stores. We did undertake some efforts to work directly with grocery stores, but really found it to be kind of a tough nut to crack on a municipal level. A lot of them are operating on sort of a national platform level and had a hard time operating in a more detailed policy-based way with us, even though many of the grocery stores within the city of Denver are donating excess food to food rescue and food access partners already. So based on that, we decided to focus on household level waste. And we conducted a number of different household waste audits. This is one that we participated in and found that actually our residents were wasting around 14 pounds of food per household on week on average, which is higher than the initial sort of high level research study showed. This research was conducted and audits were conducted in 2021. This is just from one neighborhood. So if you take a look at these pictures, this is one sort of picture per household, per family for a single week. We decided to look into low income residents and neighborhoods specifically because we have heard and seen in research that there are barriers around residents who might be receiving food boxes from food pantries and not getting the right food for themselves. And so we've done these audits and a series of focus groups to really understand what were their particular concerns and how to really properly message and provide education and feedback to those communities. Some of the things that we found is the highest levels of food being wasted within these neighborhoods were coffee, chicken, milk, bananas, bread, potatoes. So sort of highly, I'm losing my word here, highly susceptible to food waste, very fungible items. But most of the items that are being composted within the city of Denver are yard waste. So most of what's going into our compost bins is not food waste itself necessarily. We really saw that through doing these food waste audits that we were going to try and really move beyond basic education, awareness building, and focus on community-based social marketing that uses human psychological approaches to really understand what messages and what sort of prompts shift actual behavior change. So testing different messaging, testing different materials, and moving beyond just sort of awareness raising and really trying to assess the effectiveness of our messaging to shift behavior change within the residential context. We sent out materials in English and Spanish to over 600 households and conducted pre and post audits, waste audits and surveys to really assess our results and see what was the most effective messaging and materials to affect change. You can see some of the materials here on the slide. We included clings that could be put on recycling, and we had a refrigerator magnet where you could write out your leftovers. We had a brochure about how to save food and preserve food best. And the campaign was really aimed at leftovers based on the research around what types of food that we found could be rescued out of the food waste that we were seeing within our stream. There was a lot of potentially edible food within the waste stream. It was not necessarily bones or unusable scraps of food, things like eggshells or coffee grounds. It was a lot of items that could have potentially been eaten. What we found is that by conducting the campaign, there was a effective impact on the amount of leftovers who were consumed within those households who received the campaign materials compared to the control group by focusing and then providing these actual materials themselves. We did the pre and post treatment. We had online postcard surveys, paper surveys. We had people canvassing to go directly door to door to see what the impact of the result was. And based on the results of the survey, we are editing our materials and expanding the campaign with some additional funding that we've gotten from the U.S. Conference of Mayors to really deepen and broaden the campaign to other neighborhoods as well. We are
2 minutes remaining.
Thank you. We're conducting additional focus groups with Hispanic populations and African American populations to really understand messaging and tools that are targeted and culturally responsive to our specific communities and neighborhoods that we're hoping to conduct outreach based on lower rates of posting in those neighborhoods currently. They're even sort of giving us feedback on, like, would a potato and onion bag be a useful resource to you? Would you prefer a bin to have your leftovers moved front and center in your refrigerator? Who are the most trusted voices or messengers for these messages to reach you in your specific community or neighborhoods? And so we've gotten a lot of really wonderful feedback through those focus groups. I'm going to just very quickly highlight that we also conducted a retail campaign with a restaurant challenge where we have worked directly with neighborhood-based sort of commercial corridors of restaurants to help them reduce food waste within their context by reusing food creatively and creating new dishes, new sauces, things like this restaurant on the right decided to create a new herb sauce after they saw how many sort of herb stems that they were wasting, create a new pesto. They really got a lot of positive press for the campaign, but we found that with the pandemic that there was a lot of challenges in supporting restaurants in a time when they were really struggling to remain open and be fully staffed. Now that things are getting a little bit back, we're really eager to re-engage with them and to be working specifically to help them to donate food, which is a challenge for a lot of them because their hours may not align with a lot of the food rescue organizations. So employing some technology, some apps, and really understanding how they can feel safe and not liable through education to our public health inspectors as well, so that they can feel that they can safely donate food and most effectively use their time. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about our work. There's a lot more going on around food waste in Denver, but we felt like it was helpful to sort of share where we're using these principles of community-based social marketing to really shift behavior change and move beyond just straight up education and outreach. So thank you for the opportunity to present. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating, and to see everything that is going on in Denver. I mean, I really am hearing partnerships. You're working with so many different partners on this, because this is not something that one organization, one office, one group can do alone. And really impressive that 3.5 pounds of food per person wasted every week. I mean, when we see figures like this, which we've been seeing from all of the participants, that really does make a real impression. I am going to ask, because we have tons of questions here, and unfortunately so little time, but we're going to use it to the best of our ability. So if we can pull up all of the panelists up to the screen so that we can have a conversation here. And I am sorry, because we could do this for 2 hours. I know you've covered so much here, but we're going to ask you to just take about 1 minute to, we're going to do a quick round of questions if I can, because a lot have come in. The first one, we've heard so many great presentations here that I'd really love to get a 1 minute takeaway from each of you. I'll do roundtable. What interested you or impressed you most as something that you heard from one of the presentations, and what is something that you think might be applicable or interesting to your community? So Laine, I'm going to go backwards this way. If you could answer both of those, sorry, 1 minute.
Yeah, I think something that Baltimore mentioned in their work, and also David mentioned as well, was just really thinking about the importance of cross-governmental community collaboration. We cannot do this work alone. I'm in the Department of Public Health. We have to work with our Department of Transportation Infrastructure. We have to work with community-based organizations, and really being able to kind of have the most impact where we as cities are able to have the most impact, and to work collaboratively to really hit every part of the sector, I think is really going to be something just for me to reflect on, and for us that we've really seen a lot of success in. We have not been able to be as effective when we're working on our own, and really having those cross-agency and nonprofit partnership collaborations have been critical for us.
Fantastic. David, can I go to you next?
Sure. I really appreciate a lot of the messaging and focused targeting on residents to reduce their own food waste, which is we've done a bunch of research in this space, and we're about to sort of dive into it in the coming year. But there were a lot of interesting messages and interesting tactics that I definitely want to learn more about as we move down that road. That was really great.
Fantastic. I'm going to do US, Canada. So I'm going to go to Ava next.
Yes, so I think just creating more continuity across kind of like these different areas of work. We think of like these hierarchies in terms of like how we should be prioritizing efforts, but it's like we just need more people doing more things to reduce wasted food. I do think particularly in the area of food rescue, there's a lot to be better understood there at the local level, and what it looks like, again, to look beyond kind of like the traditional framing that has been used for food rescue. And then it's also like a behavior change issue. How do we get down to the culture and the psychology of waste habits and to really understand how we address those habits at the residential level, but also among institutions and among food systems workers as well, in that process, prioritizing and really better valuing and honoring the very valuable work of everyone that works along the food supply chain.
Thanks, Eva. And Denise?
I don't even know where to start. I feel like there's so much here. I really appreciate Eva and Laine. Both of you gave such great examples of really going deep in your places. And I think I actually learned a lot from both of your presentations. Eva, I really liked the piece around reframing what we think of as food waste and how it goes to what communities. And we learned that lesson actually a few years ago, how important it was to really move upstream. I think one of the lessons that we learned was that food reduction and food recovery is great. We're only going to win this if we move it upstream to prevent. That is really critical. And I talked about place-based hubs. David and his team are like the shining star in Canada. Like, we look to them all the time. We go, tell us how you do it. And when we say place-based hub, though, it's not just about going deep in our cities, right? It's about understanding how we can shorten supply chains and how cities can become a focal point for all supply chain actors. That is what it means to go deep into place, have place-based relationships, and go circular. We have to address everything from how we work with our farmers, how we procure, how we upcycle at the point of processing. And that is our job, I think, as cities. We are the place where food is grown, distributed, sold, eaten. So let's take all those actors and build it together. And so this is what I would say about being careful around those behavior change campaigns. They are one tool and one tool only, and they only hit the household level. They're important, and they're important to scale up from hub to hub or city to city. That's the other thing. Like, how are we working together as a collaboration of cities, and then at a state or province level, and then federally? So those campaign messages need to be harmonized. Because consumers need to hear them over and over again. And then we need to go deep with those circular food supply chain relationships so that we're preventing waste from happening right from the get-go. Okay, I can go on, but I'll leave it at that.
Well, actually, Denise, I'm going to pull on something that you just said. We've got all of these great experiences here. How do we do this and have a network where you can learn from one another and get these ideas and try things out and find something that worked or didn't work and be able to do that? I'll do the reverse order, Denise, if you'd like to ask that. What would be useful for you for a network? I imagine you already have it in Canada, but could it be expanded? Other countries within the US? What would be useful?
Yeah, I mean, expanding the network is always important. David and I are going to work on a food hub in Nova Scotia, right? So we're building that, and it's taking Guelph's experiences really and our experience with convening and connecting people, and then trying to do it with partners in Nova Scotia. So the idea is that if we start to build a series of deep place-based hubs that are working circular in a circular way, you create a net of deep change so that ultimately you have these anchors, and ideally they flip the whole economy in Canada to something that is circular, right? Because trying to do that whole meta level work at once is just too hard. And yes, we do need an international network. The council does work with RAP in UK. We work with ReFed and NRDC, less so in the US. You know, how do we continue to build those relationships? There's always lessons learned, and then we need to Canadianize them. We need to make them, you know, culturally and geopolitically relevant for us. And so that's the work that the council does. I've answered sort of your question in a couple of different ways.
Absolutely.
But having things like this is really great, because it means that I just learned so much from Ava and Laine, and, you know, thank you. And David, I learn from David all the time. Okay.
Fantastic. Ava, same question for you. Ideas for networks and what Baltimore could get out of that and what Baltimore could offer to others.
Yeah, I think one of the things that came out of a really interesting session supported by the National Science Foundation a few years ago to bring together food waste researchers across the US to really unpack kind of like what are the issues that we're looking at, that we're trying to tackle, was again looking at that workforce. I think it's a field of a specialty field that's kind of like evolving when it comes to that food waste practitioner, that food waste professional. So I think there's some possibilities of seeing more curriculum or degree programs that are focused explicitly on food waste reduction, or providing professionals with those skills to better navigate the field. And there is an exciting research project that was recently funded by NSF called Multi-Scales Recipes. Dr. Ronnie Neff at Johns Hopkins University at their Center for a Livable Future is one of the researchers on that project, but it includes 11 different institutions and 40 researchers. And so I think that particular project and others like it that are really showing the value and the need to better understand how we look at and address food waste. And then again, I think it's also, it's the broader like organic waste kind of category, right? Because food waste is one part of our larger organic waste. And that has a whole lot of other things, you know, when we think of biosolids and lots of other things. So I think it's really determining how we're being smarter about the management of our natural resources with food systems and soil health and environmental justice and circular economy all at the center of that, and building up the most competent and ready workforce to tackle those issues.
Great, thank you, Ava. David, and then Laine, I'm going to hold you to 1 minute, if you could.
Yeah, so I think we need a range of different platforms. The Milan Pact is one that I think, you know, a number of cities here are all members of. I was talking with Ava's colleague in Rio de Janeiro a couple weeks ago, actually, at a Milan conference, and we're starting up, or we're scaling a fresh food prescription program here, working with local health units, and they're doing one there, and like looking to see how we can collaborate. So there's definitely that level. I think we also need more at the local level, because I think the Canadian context politically, you know, where we're at in terms of our current waste management system is quite different than the US. So I think we need a range of them. But I think an important thing that Laine mentioned too was recognizing the scale of the agri-food business, and that, you know, we're all in our own little pockets, but we're dealing with the same giant multinational corporations. And their shareholders, for the most part, want them all to do better. Like they showed up on the Dr. Buzby slide originally at the start of this. And so we also need to be, you know, down at the local level, figuring out where at the local level we work with those corporations that cross all of our places to create more systematic approaches to food rescue. And so we're not just doing one-offs and relearning lessons everywhere, but doing this in a much more systemized way. I think, you know, switching from waste, because if we're talking about waste, we're talking too late. And that's something we need to all think about. And like, that's where we focus on circular economy, because we're moving upstream and we're looking at innovation and jobs and growth and social equity and all that stuff coming into it, and working with Denise and, starting up hubs in Vancouver and Halifax for our COIL program. So I think we need a range of these things to work together to make sure we're learning as we go.
Thank you, David. Last, Laine?
Yeah, I think we've heard some really excellent suggestions already. I think the past couple of years with the pandemic has also just sort of given a lot of thought for us and how we consider food waste reduction and food access to be an important part of our context around resiliency, adaptation, and our climate, whether that's our individual and population health level impact that we have, or our sort of planetary impacts that we have on our environmental systems, our city systems, our place-based systems as well. And so I think what we're trying to really think about is sort of sustainability and resiliency of our food system as a whole, and how waste is a sort of unnecessary byproduct of that process, and how we can really think through improving the efficiency of the system for the justice of our community, for the food sovereignty of our community, so that we can be more resilient should a crisis occur. And really also to just think about how our systems can operate more effectively. So that has to do with us operating on the local city level, coordinating with our state level partners, thinking about opportunities like the White House Conference on Nutrition and Food Access that just happened, and how can we help at our local level drive federal policy, and vice versa, how federal policy and funding and initiatives can really help to support what we're able to do and enable on a local sort of city-based level as well.
Fantastic. A question to David, because he was speaking about byproducts, and specifically you were giving a great example of both the onions and the tofu. Are these things that you're also working with other communities with your examples and working with others to see what they're doing? Is this something that you think could also be useful network to see case studies and what has worked and what, as we discussed before, what hasn't worked, which could be useful as well?
Yes. So we are, our programs right now are stretching all across Southern Ontario. So we're working with a range of different communities within our sort of the accelerator program right now to make sure they're included, and we're tapping into businesses where that could potentially benefit. But we're also working to sort of expand this model as well. So we're working to set up effectively a COIL in Vancouver and one in Halifax. So, the circular economy ultimately needs to be place-based, right? There's no point if we're trucking everything around. So we all need to make better use of all of our resources that currently are accidentally sent to waste. So yeah, so we're working on spreading that knowledge to the best we can to develop jobs and social equity and all the rest.
Great. Okay, we have so many questions, but sadly we're not going to be able to get to it, and I would like to be able to pass over to Jocelyn, but if Jocelyn doesn't mind, really 1 minute, a tweetable little response, because there was a good question that came in about research gaps. What kind of data and resources would you like to have which would help you to implement the best activities for your food loss and waste reduction program? So I'm really going to ask for a tweetable response. Laine, I'll start with you and do a round robin.
I would love to do something like New York has conducted, where we could see the waste levels on all commercial businesses, all of our grocery stores, and have that as mandated public reporting one day.
Fantastic. Denise?
I actually want to understand better who is doing what research. So we are partnering with a couple of researchers to run a national kind of get together of researchers in Canada, so that that will help us better understand the research gaps, because what we have found is that there is a lot of information out there. It's making sure that we all have a handle on it, and making sure that the same research question isn't asked multiple times by different researchers. And in fact, what we're doing is making sure that we're covering a full spectrum of knowledge building. So it's not what we need, but it really is. I actually think we need research to better understand the gaps. Yeah.
Good point. And we also get into our networking again.
That's right.
Kara?
I think for us, a gap
considering that we're about to have to start implementing a bill in Maryland that requires large producers of organic material to divert that from a landfill. I think from a city perspective, there's a gap in knowing exactly who in the private sector will have to comply with that, and which leads a big gap in knowing how to reach out to them, how to connect, and making sure that material is diverted.
Great, excellent. David, quick response.
I would say knowing more about those byproducts that could have value that are getting sent to landfill. And we know where they are in a high level data way, but knowing where they are specifically so you can access them and you can actually create a marketplace for all of these materials where, so we can actually get more value from them and waste streams can become value streams.
Excellent. And Ava, you have the last word.
I just have to highlight one of our great partners here in the city, Marvin Hayes from the Baltimore Compost Collective. He always says a rind is a terrible thing to waste, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I also think it's about our soils fundamentally. It all depends on the soil. Without healthy soils, we don't have a healthy food system. We don't have healthy ecosystems or adequate biodiversity. And the more that we can look at, again, wasted food through these multiple lenses, including soil health, environmental justice, in realizing that this is a food systems issue. It's not just like us food-based people who care about this. The more that we can mainstream the topic and integrate it into other industries in every aspect of life.
Absolutely fantastic. All I can do is thank our panelists so much for all of the interesting discussions they've sparked here. We know we could go on another 2 hours, so we'll definitely have to do this another time and have a longer question and answer session, but thank you so much for that. I am now going to move on to our final section and welcome. I'm so happy to be able to welcome my colleague, my FAO colleague, to the floor to be able to give the closing notes for this interesting discussion we've been having today. Jocelyn Brown Hall is the director of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations Liaison Office for North America, based in Washington, D.C. And prior to this role, she served as the deputy regional representative for the FAO Regional Office for Africa, where she oversaw 47 FAO country offices and guided strategy and communications around food security, agriculture, climate change, agri-food trade, animal and plant health, among other topics. She has also served as FAO representative for Ghana, where she worked with ministries of agriculture, fisheries, social protection, and trade on advancing issues such as healthy school meals, rehabilitating lands contaminated by illegal mining, sustainable aquaculture and fish smoking, and digitalization of agriculture data. Before joining FAO, Jocelyn was Deputy Administrator on the Foreign Agricultural Service, where she led the USDA's $2 billion food and technical assistance programs in low and middle income countries. She oversaw the world's largest international schools meal program, serving over 4 million school children globally, and numerous fellowships programs that served tens and thousands of agriculturalists. She also served as a lead expert on USDA's technical relationship with international organizations such as FAO, the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture, and various international research centers. Jocelyn, you have a difficult task in summarizing all of the discussion today. So thank you. The closing words are yours.
Thank you so much, and thanks for that introduction, and thank you, Kimberly, for moderating the session. And I want to thank all of our presenters, Denise, David, Ava, Kara, and Laine, presenting a wide range of options and solutions to the food loss and waste issue. I think we get bogged down in the numbers. I certainly do. $400 billion worth of waste, and 14% of food can go to waste, or up to a third of production can go to waste, and it just gets overwhelming. And I really was inspired by all of the different solutions that we posited today. I kind of want to just wrap up what I heard, and what I'm taking away from this is, the first one is this thirst for data. And I wanted to point out that FAO does have a food loss and waste database that hopefully we can put up in the chat here. It is global, so it's not going to get you down to the provincial or municipal level, but it does give you a view of what's happening at the global level. And I encourage everyone to look at that. It's a compilation of over 700 publications around food loss and waste. And obviously there's a lot more to do, but it's a good place to start. I also want to, talk about other FAO production information on our website around, what is produced and what is lost at production level. Obviously, production is one of FAO's main goals, and it's one of our strategic pillars, one of our 4 strategic pillars: better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life. And so I encourage everyone to look at those options for you. Something that this webinar also reminded me of, how agriculture and food security issues are probably unlike in any other sector, global and local. I heard a lot of people today talking about, really digging in at the community level, but then also having to work with provincial and federal governments. So it just shows you the solutions need to work up and down and across the government levels, which takes me to my next point about this collaboration issue. Agriculture touches so many different sectors. Food loss and waste does as well. Health, transportation, environment, climate change, parks and recreation, health, nutrition. So just an encouragement to everyone to make sure that all different players are at the table when we're devising these solutions. And then finally, this idea around innovation and food loss and waste. Innovation. Our FAO now is pressing forward with innovation as a key part of the solution around food insecurity. We have a report that came out today talking about the importance of technology and innovation in the agricultural sector. But how do we use food waste as possible energy sources or other upcycled sources? So I think those are really fascinating ideas to put forward. Not that you're going to grow food to waste it to become energy, but that if it's a byproduct that you have nothing else to do with, how can it be turned into energy? So those are kind of my takeaways, Kimberly and others. I really appreciate it. I've learned so much, and I thought I knew a lot about this field, but I still had a lot to learn, and I look forward to future discussions. And thanks to USDA, my former home, for co-hosting this important discussion with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And yes, 100% agree. We learn, we do so many at FAO, so many events with food loss and waste, bringing people from all over the world, seeing the success stories, and we're constantly learning new things. And like Jocelyn, I really appreciate these type of events that are based on solutions, because yes, the the challenges are daunting, and we're always happy to see things that are working on the ground and that can be scaled up. So I certainly hope that this is the start of many conversations like this. Thank you for all who participated. Obviously, our wonderful panelists. Thank you to the USDA and FAO Washington for organizing this, and all of the wonderful panel members who were able to give us all of the information that's happening on the ground. And thank you to all of those who participated in the question and answer from, as we see, from around the world. Thank you so much. And please remember that the 29th of September is also a day that FAO is very involved in, International Day of the Awareness of Food Loss and Waste. We have celebrated 3 years. We'll be celebrating as well this next September, where we hope to spotlight a lot of these wonderful success stories. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're joining us. Thank you.